Okay, so last time you did kind of an introduction to hypothesis testing. So remember, hypothesis is just a claim about something. And so you want to find out if that hypothesis is true or false. If it's true, you want to fail to reject the null. If it's not true, then you want to reject it. We talked a little bit last time about you got to be careful though. Most people think that you're testing the claim. What you're really testing is the null hypothesis. And the null hypothesis is the one that has equals. So in that introduction video on your homework for last time, you kind of did the first few steps in hypothesis testing. Well, what we're going to do today is we're going to finish those steps out for proportion. And the next video that you watch will be finishing them out for mean. So let me kind of show you some examples so that you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Let's go look at this hypothesis testing for proportion or percentage first. Okay, so it's going to be a reminder of the steps you had last time. So these first six steps are the same ones that you had in the last video. So what you might want to do is just kind of pause and go get your notes out so that you've got kind of your steps written out from last time. I'm going to expand step 7. But the other steps are going to be the same. So same thing, you're going to read in the word problem and you're going to find where it says test the claim that, and you're going to underline that part in your book. That thing that you underline is your claim, so that's what you change from an English sentence to a mathematical kind of inequality or equation. So that English sentence gets turned into a math sentence. Then you write a second mathematical sentence that encompasses all the other possibilities. So now you've got 2 math sentences on your paper. One of those is the null hypothesis and the other is the alternative hypothesis. Now remember, how do you decide which one's which? The null hypothesis has the equals in it. So label which one's your null and which one's your alternative. And remember, the reason you need both is you're always testing the null hypothesis. But the alternative hypothesis tells you which test to use. If that alternative hypothesis has less than in it, use something called the left-tailed test. If it's got greater than, use something called a right-tailed test. And if it's not equal to, use something called the two-tailed test. And then the book's going to tell you the significance level. If it doesn't, then you default to 0.05. But on a test, I will tell you. Now, these 6 steps are the same for mean and proportion. What's going to be different is step 7. So let's kind of go talk through the part that would be different. How do you get number 7? Just said basically go to the calculator and get your P. Your P is a probability. Now, how do you do that? Well, it's different for mean than it is for proportion. So this video is going to talk about proportion. So if you're testing a claim about a proportion or a percentage, here's what you're going to do. You're going to get your calculator out. So you might want to freeze this and then go get your calculator and come back. All right, now that you've got your calculator, you're going to go over to Stat. And then that menu at the top comes up and you're going to go over to Tests. That's that right one. Hit Enter. And then when you're going to scroll down till you find one prop Z test. That prop stands for proportion, and that test stands for hypothesis testing, and it uses Z-score. So that's the reason it's called one prop Z test. Now on my calculator, that's number 5, but it might be different on yours. All right, so scroll down to one prop Z test and hit Enter. And these things should come on your screen. It wants a P sub 0, an X, and an N. So you're going to have to enter that for your problem. Now that P sub 0, where do you find that? It's what number you have next to your null hypothesis. So go back and find your null hypothesis and enter that number into your machine. Now remember X and N. N's easy. N's your total. So in every formula, all semester, N's been your total. So N's your total. X is your value from the problem. And we're going to work a couple in a minute to make sure that you're clear about that. When you've got those 3 values entered, go down and look. It's going to ask you on proportion, which test do you want to use? Not equal to, less than, or greater than. You look at your alternative hypothesis, and that's the one that you pick. If your alternative hypothesis has less than, then you go down and highlight this less than. If your null hypothesis has, equals, and your alternative has not equal, you highlight not equal. So you look at that alternative hypothesis, and then you choose the one here that matches. all right? And then you enter all that into your calculator and find your p-value, okay? So let's go kind of look at the rest of the steps. Once you find that p-value on your machine, you're going to write down p and compare it to an alpha. Remember, alpha is that significance level. If the probability from your calculator is less than alpha or equal to alpha, you're going to write down the words reject the null. If that probability off your calculator is bigger than your significance level, bigger than alpha, you're going to write down failed to reject the null. And then you're going to use this flow chart on page 366 in your book, and you're going to write your final answer down there. And so your final answer is going to be an English sentence, okay? So let's kind of go back and look and work a couple of problems. So why don't you freeze the video and do like I'm doing. I'm about to go get my calculator and my book and be right back. So you go do the same thing. Okay. Here we go. All right. Calculator and book. Okay. So look what example 1 tells you to do. All right. Example 1 says a program was designed to assist people in their ability to stop smoking. So of the 212 patients who were admitted to the program, 140 of the patients were no longer smoking at the completion of the program. So here it says, use the decimal 10 significance level to test the claim that at least 70% of patients stop smoking when using this program. So what I did was, after I read the problem, I went back and found, I'm looking for it where it says test the claim that. And then I underline what follows. So I underline that in my book. Use a pencil, okay? Now look what happens. I take this thing I've underlined and I turned it into a math sentence. Now remember, at least doesn't mean less than, at least means that number or bigger. Now if you're doing a percentage, so that's a proportion, so that's why I put P. Now remember, use a population symbol. Don't put P hat, put P. And at least means that number equal to or bigger. So on my paper, I would have written P greater than equal to and change your percent, remember, change your percent to a decimal. And I put the word claim next to it. You're going to get lost if you don't do that. So the only thing on my paper at this point is P is greater than or equal to decimal 70 in the word claim. Now, how do I get my second sentence? Well, if that's not true, if P is not greater than or equal to 70 hundredths, what must be true? P would have to be less than that, so that's why I put this second sentence down here. Now I'm looking at these two sentences, and I've got to label one null and one alternative. Remember, the null's the one that has equals in it. So which one of these two has equals? That one, that's right. So that's why I labeled it null hypothesis, and this one alternative hypothesis. Then I go back and look for my significance level. See, it straight up tells me that's my significance level. So alpha, that's my significance level, equals that number. So I'm going to use, now I decide which test to use. The alternative tells you the alternative has less than in it. So I'm using this thing called a left tail test, okay? Now, what do I do next? Well, now these are my first 6 steps. So you should have done these on your homework last time. So now I'm ready to do step 7. Remember what step 7 was? I've got to go over to stats, and then I've got to go over to test, and I've got to scroll down until I find one prop Z test and enter. So remember what I said, you've got your notes next to you, I hope. Look what step 7 says. I've got to enter these values. So I go to my null hypothesis. Look what number's sitting there, 0.70. So that's why I put 0.70. End your total. Look, how many were you sampling? 212. So that's my N, my 212. Now, I wanted the people who stopped smoking. So I go back and look for how many stopped smoking, and it's at 140 stopped smoking. So that's why X is 140. But now, what if it had said the percentage that did not stop smoking? So just make sure that your X matches what it's talking about. Now, why did I choose the not equal to 0? Because I look at my null, I look at my alternative hypothesis. So that an alternative had less than in it, so I picked less than 0. So all that's entered into the calculator, and then I go down and I hit calculate, and I'm looking for P, not P hat, but P. And this is the P. When I scroll down, that's the P on my machine. Now, I do want to make a distinction here. Sometimes you have the same word that means two different things in English. Okay, and sometimes in math you have the same symbol that means two different things, and if it's in the same problem it can be a little confusing, as here. The P right here stands for proportion, but the P right here stands for probability. Okay, and this P right here is the probability P. Okay, so you always write down P and put a box and put alpha. And then you fill them in. What was your P? Your probability was this number. I just rounded to about 3 decimal places. And then my alpha is my significance level over here. Now you've got to make this sentence true. What is 0.104 compared to 0.10? This number is a little bigger than that number. And look at what your steps say. If your P is greater than alpha, then you failed to reject the null. So that's why I wrote failed to reject the null. Then you need to turn to page 366 in your book. All right, so freeze the video and get turned to that page. Okay, hopefully you're back and you've got your page. So look at the flow chart to make sure we understand. Look where it says start in the middle of that flow chart. Does the original claim contain the condition of equality? Now go back and look. Here's your claim. Remember I said you better put the word claim next to it? This is your claim. Does it have an equals in it? The answer is yes. I didn't say is it equals, I said does it have an equals in it? It has greater than or equal to, so it's got an equals in it. So I pick yes on the flow chart, so I go to the right. Next question. Do you reject H sub 0? This is your null. Did you reject your null? And the answer, of course, is no. You did not. See, it says failed to reject the null. So you literally follow the no on your flow chart and you write down, there is not significant evidence to warrant rejection of the claim that. Now, do you see on the flow chart where it has dot, dot, dot? Where it has dot, dot, dot is where you go back to what you underlined in the word problem and you literally write down what you have underlined in place of that dot, dot, dot. So do you understand that if you don't write the word claim when you start and you don't underline in your problem when you start, you're going to get lost, okay? So if you do what I tell you, you'll be great. Okay, let's look at one more. So you've got your book open to page 366, you've got your steps beside you, and you've got your notes. All right, so let's go try another one. Let me clear this markings. And then let me go to this next slide. We're going to work one more together. Now, what you might want to do is kind of freeze it and kind of go along and see if you can do it by yourself. In a genetics experiment with peas, a sample of offspring produced 179 yellow peas and 431 green peas. Use the 0.05 significance level to test the claim that, under the same conditions, 75% of the offspring will be green. Okay? So you're going to kind of redo the experiment. This is what you kind of expect to happen. So I go back and find, test the claim that, and I underline what follows. Okay, so that's kind of the first thing I do. I underline what the claim is. Then I change this underline to a math sentence. 75% will be. Okay, so it's percentage, so that's why it's P. Will be is equals, and make sure you change it to a decimal. P's are between zeros and ones, remember, okay? And I wrote the word claim next to it because I'm going to need that when I get back to page 366 in that flow chart. So if this is not true, if P does not equal that, that's my second sentence. Either P equals 75/100 or it doesn't equal. Now I've got to decide which one's the null and which one's the alternative. All right, which one has the equals in it? That one did, so this one's my null and this one's my alternative. Now remember, I'm going to test this one, but this one tells me which test to run. So because my alternative has not equals, I'm going to run something called a two-tailed test, okay? And then my significance level, they told me was 0.05 this time. So this is just your first 6 steps that you've been doing for a while now. Now step 7, you go, if it's doing proportion or percentage, then you go choose one prop z-test. And you enter these 3 values. So remember, P sub 0 comes from your null. So in my null, I've got 0.75. So that goes there. My total, I didn't have a total. How did I get my total? Well, I added my yellow to my green and got 610 total. Now, is X the green peas or the yellow peas? How do I know? Well, look at your claim. So you're saying it will be green. So that's why I put 431. Now, how do I decide which test to choose? Remember, I go back to my alternative. It said not equal, so I choose not equal. And I hit calculate and look for my probability. So when you scroll down the machine, don't make sure you're not glancing. You don't want p hat, you want p, your probability. This is your probability. And then on your paper, put P, the letter P, a box, and alpha, and then fill them in. Your probability is this number. You can write it all out or you can round it off. We're trying to find the first place, those are different. And then your alpha, remember, you wrote down your alpha was 0.05. Now remember, you're looking for the first place, they're different. The ones column's the same, the tenths column's the same. The first place they're different is that hundredths column. And 1 is less than 0.05. So P is less than alpha. And then go back and look in your steps. If your P is less than or equal to alpha, you reject the null. So this is written on your paper. Then you go to page 366. So look what it says on page 366 on that flow chart. It says the original claim contained equality. Well, here's your claim. Has it got equals? Yes. So you follow yes. All right, the second question it asks you, did you reject the null? Now this time, what? Yes. We rejected the null, so I follow the yes. And I literally write down, there is sufficient evidence to warrant rejection of the claim that, and then what happens right here when I get to the ... I go back and write down what I underlined in the book. Under the same conditions, 75% of the offspring will be green. Okay, so it's not hard. You've got your book, your calculator, and your notes. So go try those homework problems. Okay, let me kind of stop the sharing of the screen. Okay, try those homework problems. If you have any trouble, just email me and we'll set up a Zoom meeting or email back and forth until we get you fixed. But you've got those first 6 steps. Hopefully you mastered those. So the only thing you're doing now is you're going to the right place on your calculator to get a probability. And then you compare that P to that alpha and make it a true sentence. And then you either write down reject the null or fail to reject the null. Then you go to page 366 in your books and use that flow chart to write your sentence answer. Okay, not hard, pretty simple. Okay, and when you take your test, you're going to have your book, your notes, and your calculator. But if you need me, make sure that you let me know. All right, have a great day.